Well, thank you very much. And the government have done everything they can to make housing in Australia so much worse than it was when they came to office over 2 years ago. And all you need to do is look at what the RBA said in their announcement from last week, where they said that they were looking to now only hit target inflation in 2027 because, quote, in part this owes to a stronger outlook for domestic demand. Now, the government is spending too much money, which is driving increased demand from the public sector, and that is keeping the pressure on the Reserve Bank. And the Reserve Bank is considering its position whether it needs to increase rates rather than cut rates, as we've seen in comparable economies. And so what does this all mean? Well, it means that we have a persistent inflation problem, which makes things much harder for prospective homeowners, but also for renters. But it comes on top of a series of disasters in the housing portfolio, which has recently been flipped by the Prime Minister in his reshuffle, where he sacked the old housing minister and has appointed a new one. The problem with the new housing minister is committed to the same policies as the last housing minister. So we've seen, frankly, a disaster in relation to this Housing Australia Future Fund slush fund. We've seen a failure on the housing targets. And then we've seen this build-to-rent idea. And the idea here is that foreign corporations, foreign fund managers, become the landlords to Australians. Now, this is a massive perversion of the Australian dream, a twisting of the Australian dream from a dream where people own their own houses to an idea where your house is owned by BlackRock or Vanguard or Cbus. That is a disgusting perversion of the Australian dream, which has been perpetrated by this Labor government. And we've seen today that the new Minister, O'Neill, has said, quote, on radio, and what I can tell you is the Treasury modelling for this bill tells us that we'll have an additional 160,000 houses. Now, that is the end of the quote, and also a false quote, in the sense that Treasury never did that modelling, and that has been exposed as a huge mistake. But the point here is not so much that the minister has made a gaffe, and I understand that people get things wrong from time to time. It is the policy itself is a sick idea, because it gives up on the idea of individual ownership and agency and hands the keys to the city, so to speak, to the foreign fund managers. So these are the only people that are going to get a tax cut to build a house, foreign fund managers. Go figure. And then we've seen the disaster of the shared equity schemes, which the government hasn't even brought on for a vote. So when you think about this broader position here on housing, which is a massive problem the Australian people face, we've always been a country where people can afford to buy a house of their own, and now we have a position where that is getting away from the average worker. So what are the things that the Commonwealth Government can do to help here? There's limited options because we don't run the planning system, so the interventions from the Commonwealth Government need to be very carefully calibrated. Now, we hear nothing from the new minister or the old minister on banking and lending policy. We hear very little on super, which is a Commonwealth issue, other than trying to help the big super funds buy the houses and then lease them out to Australians like they're serfs. And we've seen this with the Housing Australia Future Fund, which will go down in history, I'm sure, as one of Labor's greatest boondoggle slush funds. These slush funds are never good ideas because you end up running them for the unions and the other vested interests. And in this case, I think this Housing Australia Future Fund wanting to partner with the super funds will be a disaster, because Australians don't want to lease their home or rent their house, I should say, from a super fund. They want to own it themselves. So you see nothing on banking, nothing on super. The only thing on tax is proposals that are bandied around Labor's caucus to increase taxes on houses, like negative gearing or capital gains tax, or, of course, the idea that you cut taxes for the build-to-rent class, Vanguards, BlackRocks and the other foreign fund managers. So far, this has been Labor's worst policy area, you'd have to say, and there's a few to compete with, but housing has been a disaster, and the people that are paying the price here are the renters and the prospective home buyers who are seeing the Australian dream slip away.
Thank you.